Hakika wema nazo fadhili, hakika wema nazo fadhili, hakika.
Welcome to Moveable Do. This is Steve Danielson. Each week, I get to sit down with a living composer and talk about their lives, their musical journeys, and of course, their music. Join me and take a peek inside the mind of a composer. For a complete archive of episodes, as well as access to the shorter segments called Movable Snippets, visit my website, sdcompose.com/moveabledo. Hey, this is Steve. Thanks for joining me for this episode of Moveable Do. My guest today is composer and performer Chrysanthe Tan. Chrysanthe is a Cambodian Greek-American composer and violinist. They earned a BA in creative writing from Stanford University, an MFA in creative writing from California Institute of the Arts, and a second MFA in music composition and violin performance from CalArts. Their work explores the connection between music and the spoken word. Their work has been performed at the Metropolitan Museum of Art, Rockefeller Center, New Orleans Jazz Festival's Rising Artist Series, the U.S. Embassy in Cambodia, and many, many more. Chrysanthe Tan, welcome to Moveable Do.
I am honored to be here. Hello.
So we are going to start today with a joint love of ours, Star Wars.
Yes.
So I was first introduced to you as a musician through your guest appearances on my favorite podcast, well, after this one, of course, Star Wars Minute, where they analyze, scrutinize, and celebrate the Star Wars movies 1 minute at a time. So you are a self-proclaimed prequel apologist. So if you could just talk briefly about your love of Star Wars and how you got involved in the whole Star Wars Minute project.
First of all, isn't it so interesting how sometimes we meet people from just completely unrelated circumstances?
Absolutely.
I love that. I think it's so cool that that's how you, I think it's so cool that that's what we have in common. So a prequel apologist. Okay. Well, I guess that's bio is a little bit outdated because I don't think being a prequel apologist I love the Star Wars prequels. And I think about 5 years ago, or like before the sequels started coming out, I think there was a little bit more distaste for the prequels amongst fans. And I have always been like 100% behind the prequels. I love the prequels because that's what I grew up with. And I got involved with Star Wars Minute actually, in an interesting way. Basically, the whole lead up to The Force Awakens coming out, which was the first Disney era Star Wars film to come out. This is when a lot of people were starting to get interested in Star Wars or like revitalize their interest in preparation for The Force Awakens. Now, I've been a die-hard Star Wars fan, and I'm almost singularly obsessed with Star Wars. I'm not into pretty much any other franchise. For me, it's been Star Wars all the way since 5th grade, like just single-mindedly, so my love for Star Wars never died at all. Like it was very, very present. But in 2015, I was on a tour for like a whole year. And I started being on a long tour. It can be really alienating. It can be a little bit isolating. And I was missing out on being home and being, part of the Star Wars community, basically. Not that there ever was a home base of a Star Wars community, but basically no one I was on tour with was a huge, huge, huge fan. And I just really, really wanted to talk to someone about Star Wars. I was just laying in my bunk on the bus one day, just looking through podcasts, just searching for podcasts that had the word Star Wars in it. And I found Star Wars Minute. So I started listening while I was on tour with Ariana Grande. I started listening in my bunk to Star Wars Minute, and that's how I got into it. When I got home, I was like, it would be cool to go on that show one day. But I didn't really think about it much more. And then about a year later is when they reached out to me, and I was like, yes, life dream accomplished.
That's right. That's still on my bucket list to check off.
I'm telling you, I was in the middle of a recording session, and I got a DM that was inviting me on the show, and I was like, oh my gosh, screw this recording session.
So I understand that you also host a Star Wars podcast, Star Wars Music Minute.
Yes.
Could you tell our audience about your podcast and why they should listen to that one?
Yes. Star Wars Music Minute is basically it got its inspiration from Star Wars Minute. And so now I'm friends with the hosts. So they gave me their blessing to do a spin-off show. And also it came from every time I would come on their show, I would talk about music or sometimes touch upon it more times than others. But I found that listeners would frequently ask for, like, say that they wish they had more. And I didn't really give myself permission to actually go in, do that, and start my own podcast, just analyzing the music and sound of Star Wars until the pandemic. So that's pandemic. That's one of my pandemic projects. And listeners, I think you should listen to it. Definitely if you're a Star Wars fan, and definitely if you're not a musician. I mean, certainly if you're a musician as well, but I like to say that the podcast, of which the aim is to celebrate the music and sound of Star Wars 5 cinematic minutes at a time, it's not really so much about analyzing music and telling the audience what is going on and like putting on, like, I don't know, like a professorial hat and being like, this is the music theory, you know, this science said, like, music theory says that this is an A+. Like, I'm not into that at all. Like, I'm all about fostering conversations about music with people regardless of their musical background. And I think everyone should be entitled to have their own opinion and reaction and to be able to expand like how they think about music. And I think it's just something I miss, because whenever I talk to people about music in the Star Wars community, they kind of take a step back and go, oh, well, I don't know anything about it. So like, I just trust your opinion. And I'm like, no, the point is to have a conversation about like how like this art is affecting us. And maybe I can facilitate you asking better questions in the future or like noticing different things. But I don't think there should be like any sort of divide between who has the right to speak about this topic or not. So that's like the point of the podcast. So
that's awesome. Well, I'll definitely recommend for our listeners that they go check out Star Wars Music Minute, and also check out Chrysanthe's appearances on Star Wars Minute. They were just recently on Solo, a Star Wars story, which is being covered this season. I could talk to you about Star Wars all day, but we do need to move on because I do want to talk about you and learn more about your music. So I saw in your bio that you did all of your degrees in California. Is that where you grew up?
It is where I grew up. I was born in Hawaii, but I grew up in California, like in the Long Beach area.
Okay. And did you have a musical family? Were your parents or siblings or anything doing music? My dad is from Cambodia. My dad was born and raised in Cambodia. He escaped during the killing fields, or, in the late 70s. So, my dad is a genocide survivor and never played music or anything. My mom is an immigrant from Greece by way of Australia. So she was born in Greece, raised in Australia, and then ended up in the US for school and then stayed here when she met my dad. And so they have me, and she's not a musician either. Now I do have some Australian relatives, like my whole family lives in Australia or like Cambodia or other parts of the country. I do have like Australian relatives that are into theater and stuff, but I as a kid just really always wanted to play music. My parents never they didn't put me into it at all. Like I begged them to first play piano, and then I saw violin playing on TV on KCET, which is like public television. Mm-hmm.
And I just was transfixed. I remember where I was sitting on the couch when I saw this violinist on TV playing some, like, I don't know, Christmas concert or whatever cheesy stuff they televise. And I just was staring at the way that the bow touches the strings and moves so fluidly. And I couldn't understand. I thought it was probably attached because it was so fluid. It looked so fluid. I didn't understand how like the stick was making that sound come out. And I just, like, I don't know what the music was. And I wasn't raised on classical music from my parents. Like, I just wanted to know how to produce that kind of sound. It just sounded like something really magical coming out of this, like, I don't know, wooden box with a stick. I did not get it. I was transfixed, and I just really wanted to play the violin. I really just, I didn't even care. I didn't have any taste of like what genre or anything. I just needed to make that sound.
How old were you when that happened?
I was in second grade. So.
Okay. So about 7, 8 in that area. So you started playing violin. When did you sort of realize that you were good at it and it was something you wanted to keep doing?
To be honest, immediately.
Yeah.
I sort of, I e- even before, like I had my first lesson, and already I just remember each time I had a lesson, I would do like 10 times beyond what I was taught, but like just with a little bit of pushing in the right direction or a little bit of knowledge. Like I feel like I already knew what I wanted to do. Like I just feel like music, for as long as I can remember, like music is like my first, it's like the most natural language to me.
Hmm.
And yeah, I just remember my teacher taught me like the open strings and then like how to maybe put my first finger down or something. And then the next time I went to my lesson, when I was like 8, I had learned by ear one of my mom's Greek records, or like
Oh, wow.
like this single off of this record. And I was playing Never on a Sunday, which I can't remember who it's by, but and my teacher was like, "Oh." And so she heard it, and like she of course like corrected anything that I could do better, and she transcribed it for me from hearing it, and made me like a cooler version of it with a nice little ending and whatever. But I was like learning by ear from the start. When I got older, I realized, oh, there's like actually a lot of competition. But like when I was still too naive to know like the whole world out there, like it always came very natural.
And were you writing music from the very beginning as well, or just improvising on violin, or when do you remember writing music?
I was not formally writing music. See, that's the thing. Like I didn't think about composing ever. It just wasn't something that I knew that like people did that weren't like 2 centuries old. Like I just didn't really think of it as like modern composers existing at first. But I was certainly improvising because my first teacher was a bluegrass fiddler. So I learned a lot of like bluegrass, and we would go to like fairs and festivals and stuff, and our concert dress would be like jeans and cowboy boots and bandanas, and we'd play like Americana folk stuff, and my violin teacher doubled as my guitar teacher, and so I was playing like old Joe Clarkey had a house, and like it was normal for at violin recitals I would stand up, play a violin piece, and then later go up there and play a guitar and sing. Like it was pretty normal. And so I was doing a lot of that, and learning by ear, memorizing, improvising. A lot of that was just really important to the very, very beginning of my training. And then in middle school, when I was starting to like get into orchestras, and like my school teacher and some parents who kind of were watching me play and stuff. I don't know. The point is like I ended up switching teachers because it was kind of impressed upon my parents who didn't know any better. Like they would have found me like a proper classical teacher if they knew what this whole world was like at the beginning. But they were just going off of family friends, whoever could teach me. And so, yeah, it was brought to their attention that I should probably like have a more rigorous teacher because I could go a lot farther if I kind of did that. So yeah, I then went into a very strict like classical training in middle school.
That's awesome. So you have a fantastic quote on your website that I'd like to read and have you respond to. You said, if Andrew Bird, Philip Glass, and Joni Mitchell had an awkward love child, then raised that child on Cambodian and Greek folk tunes, the resulting spawn would be 1, an absolute miracle of quantum physics, and 2, Chrysanthe's musical kindred spirit. So explain, what do you mean by all that?
Nice. I wrote that. Cool. Well, after submitting bios for like so many different things, you have to like find ways to like say something new at a certain point. So that, okay, the way that I came upon that was interesting because I was like, I can't remember if like I had to submit music for something or I had to do the annoying task of tagging my music with sound alikes, and and finding, audience or, whatever. I had to delve into the meta music annoying stuff, which is okay, but how do you explain it to other people? Like, what's your elevator pitch? You can't just be like, it's everything, you can't just do that. So it was suggested as an exercise that I asked people who I knew were listeners of my music to tell me honestly, and I wouldn't be offended, like what artists they saw me kind of in a similar realm as, because it's so hard to do that for yourself.
Yeah.
You might not like you. Yeah. And when I was first putting music out, a lot of people would tell me like, oh, it really, like your music reminds me of Jan Tiersen or like Olafur Arnold's and whatnot. And that is certainly true in a sense. But also Andrew Bird was coming up, and Andrew Bird happens to be like also sort of a pioneer in the field of, I guess, violinists crossing over to not just pop, because there definitely is that, but really getting into the use of electronics and looping pedals and sort of doing like a live, he's like a live one-man band, he can be, and that is something that I do as well. And, he's a master at it. And I feel like aesthetically, that is a space that I feel really in line with. And let's see, who else did I say? Joni Mitchell would be another one, because this comes up more when I'm like singing, which doesn't happen a lot. And due to what I just said about like sort of my upbringing, I was like bluegrass and folk, and not a lot of people know about that. So when I do like recreationally sing, get out my guitar, I'm like singing like Joni Mitchell, James Taylor, folk, sort of like bluegrassy country and 60s stuff, like campfire songs. Basically, it's like my aesthetic when I'm singing, and yeah, and so that's where that comes from. I also just really admire Joni Mitchell as a songwriter, not just as like a practitioner of the vocal arts. Like I really love her songwriting, which as a composer, there are just certain songwriters that I'm really attracted to, or that I just really admire the way that they can like turn a phrase in a certain way.
Yeah, I was not
Cambodian and Greek folk tunes. That's just my heritage, and that's just another big part of what I know.
Yeah. I was not familiar with Andrew Bird before I read that, and I looked him up and thought, oh, okay, I can see why Chrysanthe would have included that here.
Especially the Useless Creatures album, which is just entirely, he doesn't sing on that album. It's just like massive like violin loops. It's just like that feels like me when I'm just alone playing with my looping pedal, and just seeing what can come out of it. It's just like you can feel the generative process of Andrew Bird's music while you're listening to his music, and especially like his live sets. You can hear how the loops are building on each other, and how like sometimes they're imperfect, and sometimes due to the nature of looping, things have to maybe go on awkwardly long, or a mistake will be imprinted in the loop or something. And I just find the like artifacts of playing and composing while playing really fascinating. And
yeah. So you mentioned the Cambodian and Greek folk songs. Do you see influence of Cambodian or Greek culture or music in your compositional style today?
Absolutely. And here's the thing, like I see myself as, or like I am a composer, but also I feel, and this might be a result, this might have something to do with like where I went to school and the nature of my program, which was, as you mentioned at the beginning, a composer performer program. Like it was like a dual program for composers and performers, like hyphenated.
Mm-hmm.
So I feel very like a lot of the times my performing and composing are pretty intertwined. Not always, because sometimes I will compose things for other people to perform, but a lot of the times they're intertwined. So I think about when I'm doing live sets or when I'm doing concerts, I think of my like MFA grad recital or something, where I will like go between maybe like a Cambodian folk song, or like a Cambodian pop song even, but realized on the violin with string loops and stuff. And then I'll go into like a composition of my own that's string loops with spoken word or something. And so it is in the fabric of what I do. And the thing is, I've been thinking about this a lot, and like influences and inspirations are not always the same. I think, even if I'm not directly inspired and trying to specifically sprinkle in a little bit of Greek folk music here, which I almost never do intentionally, it undoubtedly influences the way that I write. And I notice it when I improvise, because I will ornament things in a certain way that I've learned to do while studying Greek music and doing Greek dancing. So it's just a natural part of the way that I speak through the violin. Sort of like John Williams will always, he just naturally does certain triplety things in the brass. Like he's not even trying, that's part of his musical language. So Greek and Cambodian folk music is just a naturally part of the way that I speak through music.
So you mentioned earlier that you have been on tour. You performed with Ariana Grande, among others. When was your first tour as a performer?
My first tour as a performer was as a sub for a tour. And it was more, I would just do like home gigs, home, like meaning within California. So sometimes we would drive like 8 hours up to the Northern California, or maybe go a little bit to like Las Vegas, but like West Coast. And that was actually in about maybe 2013, 2012, when I was working at a restaurant. I had dropped out of school temporarily and kind of like a crisis of art and stuff, and was working at a restaurant and just not sure what to do. And I worked at this restaurant in Los Angeles for like 18 months. And one of my customers who came in a lot knew that I was a violinist. Like we had talked about it briefly, but while he was ordering. And at some point, like he had looked me up on YouTube, and I had probably like a few things up there. And, I had some SoundCloud stuff. I had some stuff online, which was my saving grace. And he came in one day and was like, I've heard you play because I've seen some videos. I have no idea how you can sight read. I'm taking a really, really big chance, but I'm contracting this tour for Marco Antonio Solis, who's a Latin artist, and someone dropped out, and it's just for the weekend, 3 shows, but we leave in 2 days. I'm taking a chance on you. Can you do it? And I was like, yes, I can do it. So that's literally how I got my first gig, was not even auditioning, not like nothing like that. It was just someone was desperate, and I worked at a restaurant, and I just happened to be there like at the cash register and happened to have some YouTube videos up. So I did the tour. It went well. I'm a good sight reader. And yeah, that just led to more and more gigs. It led to some like Riverside, like I started playing with like some professional orchestras as a sub, or like a just one-off things. And then I played on the television show Glee, which was like a show about high schoolers who magically break out into song all the time. When magically a band
that wasn't your experience in high school?
Right. So, and magically a band shows up in the background. So I was, part of that band that just happens to be there whenever the singers need to do something.
That's awesome.
So yeah, that's just how it started. That's how it started.
And has touring gotten any easier for you over the years? No, it's still rough.
Well, after that, I continued to do, Weekend Warrior, they're called, gigs, and just one-off things, and, a lot of television. Being in LA, being part of the entertainment world is sort of a natural place to land. And once you do a good job at a certain gig, you start getting more of the same type of gig. So after that, I went on tour with Paul Anka a few times. I mean, actually many times. I continued to do that because it wasn't ever like a whole year, which that Paul Anka led to Ariana Grande in a weird way. And that was a different kind of tour for me.
We'll have a chance to come back and talk about that one when we listen to your music. Yeah.
So I'll just say that was my last major tour.
All right.
Then I've only done short things. Yeah.
So I know you often like to combine music and the spoken word. Where did that come from? What led to that interest?
It was a calling. It just chose me. I never even set out to do it. It just happened. I don't really ever set out to do things intentionally. If it happens and if I'm feeling free enough to let it happen, then it happens. When I was a kid, I had a lot of trouble speaking, and I'm autistic, and I actually didn't know that until I was an adult because I was diagnosed pretty late. And I did have oftentimes the experience of being talked to and not being able to talk back. In fact, my kindergarten teacher told my parents that she thought I was quote unquote dumb until like the first time like she like read something or found out that how many books I had read that year or something, like, because I just never spoke. But I would always hear music firing off in my head as a reaction, like not even, it wasn't something I wrote down. I never thought, oh, I'm composing, nothing like that. It was just like how when Ratatouille takes like a bite of food and like all that stuff, you can see in the animation, like all of those colors and fireworks and stuff are happening in his head. That's like how it is and was for me growing up with verbalizing like what I needed to express. It would just, music would be firing in my head and it would be like so loud. And I would just be like, I wish you could hear it because I am trying to respond, but it's just not coming out of my mouth. And so people would often be like, what are you, stupid? Like what? Like there's definitely a lot of trauma related to that. Like, why don't you just say something? Like that's a line that is like repeated in my head so many times. Like, just say something. Aren't you going to say something? Where I'm like trying to say something, but it's not coming out like that. And because of that, like, but I am like very verbose when I'm writing. And so that was always like the quiet ways of using language. That is always something I could do. And I would furiously write in notebooks and like everything, like for as long as I could remember. I have always been a writer, a journaler, like someone who just obsessively writes so much, like just fills, like I just need to always be getting something out. And my, my post, whatever, my college studies and everything like that. I always did music and writing alongside each other.
All right. I've got one more question before we take a quick break.
Okay.
And this is going to be a hard one. We're going to bring it back to Star Wars.
Oh no.
What is your favorite song or theme from the Star Wars franchise?
Binary Sunset.
Oh, nice. That was a quick, nice answer. What is about Binary Sunset that you love?
First of all, it's a lengthy theme. And it's, there's like a distinct part A and part B section, and part A would be like, and that is often quoted in a lot of places. But I find that the part B section, which we first hear like fully orchestrated when Luke is staring out at the binary sunset in A New Hope, that's imbued with like a spirit that I feel like it opens up. Like I can see like a flower blossoming there. It goes, dude, and it's sparingly used. Like it goes to such a different place than it starts. And then it comes back in. I just think the fact that I like listen and study and analyze Star Wars music so much, and yet that theme, that piece of music from the very first movie can work on me and bring me to tears like anytime I see it in film, is just, yeah, that is peak Star Wars to me. I just think it's so beautiful.
Absolutely. All right. Well, we are going to take a quick break here, and we're going to come back and listen to some of Chrysanthe's compositions. Welcome back. I'm talking today with Chrysanthe Tan. So we're going to start today with If You Lived in Your Body for violin and spoken word. So you talk about this piece on your website as a response to the tour you took in 2015 and follow-up conversations with your therapist. So I'd love you to tell about your experience and what we should expect to hear as we listen.
My experience leaving for tour, especially, and being on tour was very scary because I had never been away from home for that long of a period, and no less living on a bus, basically. So traveling all the time, and I get kind of stressed out when I don't have my things, and when I get disembodied quite often, and I just was afraid that I would feel perpetually homesick and just discombobulated. It was really frightening for me. So my therapist basically told me, before I left for tour, and then I would write it in my notebook like every day on tour. She said, if you lived in your body, you'd be home. And that stuck with me, and I found it found it so aspirational. Like, maybe there is this situation. Maybe it's okay if I'm traveling and not sure where I'll be, tomorrow, and not sure if I'll feel really suffocated by living on a bus with 10 people, like with that I don't really know that well. Like, if I can find some sense of home in my own body, then there's a possibility of always being able to feel a bit of home. And I was really desperate for some form of anchoring. So that's how that piece came about.
That's awesome. That, my father-in-law used to say something like that as we were traveling down the highway. He'd say, if we lived here, we'd be home now. And it's that same sort of idea. I think if we are comfortable in our body, then we're always home. I like that. Okay, well, we're going to listen here to If You Lived in Your Body.
I'm going on the road. Could be 6 months, maybe a year. She asks how I feel. I say, I'm terrified that I'll lose my center. I have no sense of home. I'm going on the road, living in bunks, with people I barely know. She asks how I feel. I say, I already crave home. Not the place, the feeling. I'm traveling on a bus, could be 6 months, maybe a year. Notice your body, she says. I don't want to notice my body, I say. I'd like to pretend it doesn't exist. Breathe, she says. Feel your body, she says. Why can't I hide out in my brain? Both places are inhospitable, but the brain I'm more used to. Where is home, really? Where is it? This has now become a pressing matter. I've moved 3 times in the past 3 months, and I need to figure this out. She says, if you lived in your body, you'd be home now. If I lived in my body. If I lived in my body. If I lived in my body. To live in my body, I would first need to move into my body. Breathe, she says. I don't want to, I say. Or maybe it's hard to. My body's a terrible host. Would you want to stay there? Why would I want to live there? It hurts. This body is not my body. Or worse, it is. And yet, there it is. If you lived in your body, you'd be home. If you lived in your body, you'd be home. If you lived in your body, you'd be home. If my body is my home, home will always be with me. Is that what I want? Home? Always with me? I search my journal for the word home. I count 155 times in 243 pages, an average of 1.6 times per page. I talk about going home, being at home, laying at home, working at home, loving home, hating home, escaping home, old homes, future homes, hiding at home, moving home, multiple homes, making a home. What is home? If I lived in my body, I'd be home. If I lived in my body, I'd be home. I want to be home. But then what?
All right, our next piece today, On the Other Hand, for solo violin. So you've said that this piece is about the process of formulating an argument. What do you mean by this?
So I am very self-conscious about the way that I speak. And I noticed that a lot of the times I would start to say something, even write something, and I would, be on this track and like, okay, I'm saying something. And then I would experience like another thought just interjecting and derailing the whole point of what I was trying to say, and just really trying to stay on task with getting out the original thought, but not being able to avoid this, new piece of information or just completely unrelated thing coming in. And I wanted a way to like describe how that experience is. It's so hard to describe like embodied. It's so hard to describe things that are happening inside of you in language sometimes. And I felt that expressing it through music might make more sense for me. So in the piece, there are parts, it starts out in a particular way with a particular kind of phrase, and then like other parts start to come in. It's not quite just like, I've simplified it. It's not just like interjecting thoughts. It's more like, new information comes in, and then maybe you want to divert you kind of change what you were saying to something else. It's sort of like the natural flow of thinking and putting together arguments, incorporating new pieces of information. So anyway, in the piece, there is also a part where like clearly this other, this kind of fortissimo like chord comes in, or it changes the soft opening, and then the two kind of sides continue to kind of go back and forth. There's a little bit of a like internal battle of like this thought, no, I want to say this, no, but let's do it like that. And that's what I was trying to get across in the piece.
That's awesome. Now you need to do a follow-up for that moment. 2 hours later, we're like, oh, this is what I should have said.
Just a perfectly cohesive.
That's right.
Yeah.
All right. We're going to listen here to a performance performed by Chrysanthe, On the Other Hand. All right, our next piece today is Magic Lady for piano quartet. I was really drawn in by the opening piano line of this piece, and I was hooked all the way to the end. I was following along in the score as I was listening, and I saw that I was approaching the end and thought, no, I want more, which I guess as an entertainer is what you should want to leave your audience. Can you talk to us about writing this piece?
So I wrote this piece in a really weird time in my life. I guess all times in life are weird, but I wrote this piece as part of my first album called Stories. And it was while writing this album that I realized that I became a composer, that I realized I was a composer and that I wanted to do this. Because prior to that, I wasn't. Like, I came to composing very late compared to some of my peers. I didn't compose in undergrad. I didn't compose at the beginning of grad school. I really started composing in 2012, 2013. Before then, now, I did consider myself a songwriter, a singer-songwriter. And now I don't know if I would actually make that much of a distinction. But at the time, like I said kind of at the beginning, it felt like a different step on the ladder to be like a composer. Like, that's like Mozart, that's like, it just did not feel like that's what I was doing when I was writing like Joni Mitchell type of songs,
right.
But then I was a session player though, and I would do like, do these like really intricate, like overlapping, like string parts, and that's kind of my specialty is doing string parts. And someone told me like, you should start writing music, and I was like, And this person helped me set up my first like home studio, basically. Like, I already had a keyboard that I could, play on and sing. But he helped me pick my first like microphone, and I got Logic on my computer when previously I was just using GarageBand, and I got my first pieces of equipment. And then every day I just started writing what I called exercises, and just trying to play around and see if I could just make short loops. And that's why like some of the things on that first album are so short, because I was just trying to do like an exercise a day. And they were just called like exercise 1, exercise 2, and they all had code names and stuff. And then after a few years of that, basically, or maybe a couple years, I put them up on SoundCloud and in a private link, and I shared them with a few people, and they were like, why don't you just make that an album? And I was like, are you serious? I've never put out my music. And that became part of the album. So Magic Lady was just written in that period. It was more toward the end of it. So when I had sort of knew more what I was doing, but still I hadn't yet gone to school for like a composition degree or anything like that. I had zero formal training in composition. I was just doing, always, like I've always done, just intuitively what sounded good, what felt good. I didn't, the scores came retro. They were transcribed basically from what I was just doing, when I was just recording. So I was recording all of that stuff. And I just, that piece in particular, it ended up being used by my friend who's a filmmaker. She did a short film, and she was like, I like your music because I like Olafur Arnalds. Can I use some of your stuff for my short film? And so she used that and a few others. And then I just, that one is an interesting lesson for me, that piece. And that's why I actually chose to include it, even though it's a little bit old, as the album came out in 2015. It's because I wrote all that music before going on tour in 2015, but I released the album during tour just because, you know, there's always a little bit of a time gap between when you finish the album and when it's actually ready. And when I took a leave of absence from school to go on tour, I came back to school and a mentor of mine heard some of the pieces and heard Magic Lady and kind of said, and I don't know if it was like disparaging or not, but it was just in his interpretation. He said, "Oh, I can hear the pop influence in your music now." And because I had gone on a pop tour, which when you go to like an art school is not, it's cool to some people, but it's a little bit like sell out to other people. So yeah, this mentor was reading into my album, this pop influence. And the truth is that I had written that album before the pop tour. And to me, it's a lesson that like interpreting artists' work based on what we know about their biography or like based on assumptions that we're making about the trajectory of their influences in life is a dicey subject. And you can read it. I mean, it's just, it's a lesson, put it that way.
All right. Well, we are going to take a listen here to Magic Lady. All right, our last piece today is I Dream of Kitty, electronica and spoken word. So this is unreleased, correct? So this would be like the premiere of this piece?
Yeah.
Awesome. So the spoken word in this piece describes the thought of someone lying in bed with the cat laying on top of them. I don't have a cat, but I assume this is something that you've experienced and were inspired by.
Yeah. Well, so one of the ways that I also describe my work, which I should probably update my bio to include this, but is that a lot of my work is also kind of just like my diary entries with music, set to music. Which if you lived in your body is a little bit like that. So yeah, this one just started out with me laying in bed, recording a voice memo to myself, being like, my cat is lying on me. And oh my God, like it was just a completely loopy, like I was falling asleep. And then the next morning I listened to it and I was like, I said that. That's hilarious. And because it was just really, really bad quality, like I transcribed the words, but then I re-recorded it and I changed, it didn't exactly, the text isn't exactly just what I recorded it as a voice memo, but it's the way it started. And some of the specific bits are just what I was thinking of as I was drifting to sleep. And so that's how that started. And then I added what music I thought fit the vibe that it was in.
That's awesome. All right. Well, we're going to hear the premiere here of I Dream of Kitty.
There was a time. There was a time once when my cat wouldn't come near me. I would raise a hand, and she would cower, dart away, yelp, bite. But now she lays on my chest as I try to go to sleep. Her purrs are loud, pleading, insisting. I push her away, but part of me enjoys having a warm body. She lays on my chest, purrs growing louder, claws sharp, retract, protract, little Swiss Army knives in my chest. We both lay still. If I don't move, I won't bleed. We both lay still. I don't move, I don't breathe. We both lay still. Maybe I can enjoy the touch, no words. Second thoughts, I'll let her tear me up, make me bleed, destroy what's left of me. What good is a breast to me? She can have it. I drift away to sleep, and I'll see what's left in the morning.
All right. Now, normally this is where I would end. We've listened to 4 pieces, but I wanted to throw in this last little bonus track called Lipid Bilayer. It's only about 20 seconds long. And could you tell us really quick about what are we about to hear?
This started with a friend of mine, Isaac Shankler, at the beginning of the pandemic when everyone was like, this is how you wash your hands. Like, here's like an explainer of like the CDC guidelines, blah, 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 blah. All of that stuff was happening at the beginning of the pandemic. And they kind of invited a bunch of, composer friends, put out a call on Twitter that was like, hey, like, let's put together this, put together this album, and the proceeds can go to, some like healthcare, like Medicare for all or something. And yeah, everyone just do it exactly 20 seconds because that's how long you're supposed to wash your hands. So just make it, I don't care what you make, but just like compose and record something that is exactly 20 seconds long. And it will be on an album that is just a compilation of songs to wash your hands to.
That's awesome.
So yeah.
All right. Well, we're going to listen here to Lipid Bilayer.
Lipid bilayer, lipid bilayer, lipid bilayer, no match for my soap and water. Palm to palm, backs of hands, fingers interlace, base of thumb, fingernails. Don't forget the mist. Lather, 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 get in all those crevices. Now it's time to rinse. Don't forget to dry your hands.
Well, Chrysanthe, if my listeners want to learn more about you, what's your website? Where can they find you online?
You can find me at chrysanthetan.com. Or StarWarsMusicMinute.com if you want to listen to my podcast. And I'm also a music critic, so you can find some of my writing in lots of places. My name luckily is not too common. So.
Are you on social media as well?
I am on social media. I'm on YouTube. I'm on Spotify, Twitter, TikTok. On Instagram, I do a weekly Guess the Tune series. So every Monday I post a new violin cover, and the first person to guess the tune gets to pick the next week's tune. And that
awesome.
has been going on for like 7 years.
Wow.
Do that if you want to guess some music.
All right. Well, hey, listeners out there, make sure that you are also following Moveable Do on all of our social media platforms. You can follow us on Twitter at Moveable Do. We're on Instagram at Moveable Do Listeners. And on, Instagram is Moveable Do Podcast. And on Facebook, you can join us at the Moveable Do Listeners Facebook group. If you're anti-social media, just check out the Moveable Do website at sdcompose.com/Moveable Do. Man, how many times can I say Moveable Do in one promo?
Hilarious name. My friends and I fight. I have a friend that like we argue about Moveable Do all the time. So
really?
I just laughed when you reached out and I thought that was your podcast name.
Well, Chrysanthe, it has been a pleasure to talk to you. I encourage everyone once again to go check out Star Wars Music Minute. Thank you for joining me today on Moveable Do. My guest today was composer Chrysanthe Tan. If you have a recommendation for a future guest or an idea for the show, please email me at moveabledo@gmail.com. This is Steve Danielson. Keep the music moving.